Imagine going to the ballot box to choose your next mayor, and the person voting right next to you is not a United States citizen.
Yeah, that completely disrupts the traditional mental picture of what election day looks like in this country.
Right, and right now, the Los Angeles City Council is actively debating a proposal that would actually make that scenario a reality. They want to allow non-citizens to vote in city elections.
Which is huge.
It is. The measure just advanced on a 10-5 vote.
Yeah.
And that is sending shockwaves far beyond California. It is championed by a local council member representing areas like Hollywood and Silver Lake. And honestly, this proposal forces us to ask a really fundamental question. What does citizenship actually mean if voting no longer requires it?
What really forces a reckoning. How do we define civic duty versus national identity? It touches on literally everything from local taxes to federal election security.
Exactly. So, welcome to our deep dive. Today, we are taking your sources to explore this really explosive legislative proposal in America's second largest city.
Yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We will impartially break down the exact steps this proposal must pass to become law. We will examine the passionate arguments from those who want to expand the ballot. And of course, we will dig into the fierce pushback from those who say voting is an exclusive right for Americans. So let us jump right in.
I think the best place to start is the actual blueprint of the proposal. There is this tendency to look at a 10-5 preliminary vote and think, oh, it is a done deal.
Right.
But the steps to change an election system are actually incredibly difficult.
So this is not just some quick vote on a Tuesday. The Los Angeles City Charter clearly states that voters must meet California's eligibility rules, and those rules strictly mandate U.S. citizenship.
Yeah, and overturning that is basically like trying to rewrite a constitution at the local level.
Which is massive.
It is a massive hurdle. A city charter operates very much like a local constitution. So to bypass the state's citizenship requirement, Los Angeles has to formally amend that charter.
And the bureaucracy there is pretty heavy, right?
Oh, absolutely. The proposal first has to survive the City Council Rules Committee. They act like a gatekeeper. If it actually makes it out of committee, it then needs formal approval from the entire City Council just to qualify for the next step.
Okay, so let us assume it clears the council. It then lands on the November ballot for the public to decide. But the phrasing of this ballot measure is where it gets really interesting. Voters will not actually be voting to instantly allow non-citizen voting.
Right. They're essentially voting to transfer power.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, the ballot measure would not just flip a switch and rewrite the election codes today. Instead, voters will simply decide whether to give the city council the power to expand voting rights later on.
It sounds a bit like asking your boss for permission to eventually change the company dress code rather than just, changing it today.
That is a perfect analogy. Yes.
But why structure it this way? Like, why make voters decide to grant the council power rather than just having the voters decide on the final law directly?
Mostly because the exact details are still a complete political minefield. They have not figured out where to draw the line. Would this include undocumented immigrants? Or would it only apply to legal permanent residents, like green card holders?
Ah, so they still need to get those details sussed out.
Exactly. Crafting the fine print takes a lot of time. So asking for the broad power first buys the council the time to draft the specific rules later.
Got it. Which means if voters say yes in November, the council still has to officially enact those rules, and Mayor Karen Bass must actually sign it into law.
Right. And we should really clarify the limits here. If it passes all those hurdles, this would only apply to local city and school board elections. It explicitly excludes state and federal elections.
So you could vote for the person fixing the potholes on your street or setting the budget for the local high school, but you definitely could not vote for the governor or the president.
Precisely. That firewall between local and federal elections is supposed to stay intact. Though, as we will discuss in a bit, how that actually works in practice is a huge point of debate.
Yeah, we will definitely get to that. But putting the bureaucracy aside for a second, why are leaders pushing for this in the first place? What is the core argument for expanding the ballot?
The proponents really focus their argument on representation and daily impact. They argue that local government directly affects the daily lives of everyone living in the city, no matter what their passport says.
We are talking about things like police response, trash pickup, and public schools.
Exactly. And supporters point out that many non-citizens are perfectly legal residents. These are green card holders who have lived in Los Angeles for decades.
They own businesses, raise families, and actively pay property and sales taxes.
Yes, and that is the philosophical core of their case. If these individuals actively fund the community, proponents argue they deserve a voice in how the community operates.
You know, that sounds a lot like the history we all learned in school.
Yeah.
If these residents pay taxes, is not taxation without representation the very reason America started?
That is exactly how they frame it.
How do the proponents use that specific history to justify their stance?
Well, they lean right into it. They argue that if you pay into the local pot, you deserve a seat at the local table. And this idea is not entirely unprecedented either. San Francisco and several towns in Maryland already allow non-citizens to vote in specific local or school board races.
Oh, wow. I did not realize that was already happening.
Yeah, it is. But even with those examples, the politics in Los Angeles are super tricky.
There was actually a really fascinating moment from the sources about that. When asked a direct yes or no question about allowing non-citizens to vote, both Mayor Karen Bass and Councilmember Nithya Roman answered, "It depends."
Right, they would not give a straight yes or no.
Which just shows how incredibly complicated the issue is.
It really highlights the political tightrope they're on. Saying it depends acknowledges that the public might be okay with a green card holder voting, but maybe not an undocumented immigrant. The details matter.
But that exact argument, redefining who gets a voice based on local taxes, sparks fierce pushback from opponents. They believe this fundamentally damages the value of American citizenship.
They absolutely do. Opponents operate from a totally different worldview. To them, voting is not just about managing local tax dollars. It is an exclusive privilege and a fundamental responsibility reserved only for American citizens.
The phrase critics use is that the franchise should belong solely to full-fledged members of American society. And they say it should strictly exclude anyone in the country illegally.
Yes. And a massive concern for them is what they call the incentive to naturalize.
Becoming a citizen is incredibly hard work.
It is grueling. Immigrants spend years, sometimes decades, dealing with mountains of paperwork. They pay really high fees, pass background checks, study for citizenship tests.
Or even serve in the military.
Exactly. So opponents argue that handing out voting rights, even just for local races, devalues all of that incredible hard work. If you can influence the laws without taking the final oath of citizenship, why would anyone go through that tough process?
That makes sense from their perspective, but beyond the philosophy, there's also a really deep fear about a slippery slope.
Oh, the slippery slope argument is central to the pushback.
Critics worry that starting with school boards will quickly lead to city councils, then county races, then state elections, and eventually the presidency.
Right, because if the logic is, you live here, so you should vote, opponents ask what stops that logic from applying to everything.
And that brings us to the logistics of election legitimacy, which seems to be the biggest friction point. Opponents point to California's specific election laws to highlight some major vulnerabilities.
Yeah, this part is critical. In California, the law actually prohibits poll workers from asking for voter identification at the polls.
Wait, they're not allowed to ask for ID?
No, they are not.
Yeah.
The state relies on signature verification instead. So opponents argue that this creates an impossible situation if you introduce a non-citizen voting class.
Opponents ask where we draw the line. I mean, if election workers cannot ask for ID, how do they keep the system separate?
That is the big question. If you have citizens who can vote for president and non-citizens who can only vote for mayor walking into the exact same building, the poll worker has to separate them without asking for an ID.
That sounds like a logistical nightmare. And the sources note it goes all the way back to the registration process itself. Opponents claim people have successfully registered to vote using things like Gold's gym membership cards.
Yeah, that is a huge point of contention. To help unhoused people register, the system accepts alternative proofs of residency, a utility bill or a gym membership with a local address.
But a commercial gym just wants your credit card. They are not checking your immigration status.
Exactly. And so critics argue that expanding the voter pool to non-citizens under these very loose rules completely destroys the integrity of the election process.
How do critics believe we can possibly secure local elections from federal ones if a gym card gets you a ballot?
They argue that you simply cannot. Without strict verification, opponents fear it is highly probable that non-citizens will eventually be handed a full ballot containing federal races by mistake.
So a debate about local schools turns into a massive fight over federal election security.
It absolutely does.
Pulling all of these threads together, we see that what happens in Los Angeles rarely stays in Los Angeles.
Never does. Los Angeles is a major trendsetter for policy.
It really is. If they successfully detach local voting from national citizenship, people naturally wonder if other major cities are next. Will New York, Chicago, Seattle, or Portland quickly follow suit?
It is entirely possible. We are watching a live debate over the legal definition of representation.
We really are. And we want to leave you with something to think about long after this deep dive ends. Think about your own town or city. If local voting rights become based entirely on simply living in a zip code and paying local taxes, does the title of city resident suddenly become more powerful than the title of American citizen?
That is a tough question.
It is. Which of those two titles do you think holds more weight in your daily life? Keep questioning, keep digging, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.